Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVM-LP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org. The voice of Asheville, heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio, out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. WalterParks.com for more on Walter's music. Thank you, Devine Dial, for managing WPVM-FM, and Robin Collier, thank you for managing KCEI out in Taos, New Mexico. We really do appreciate it. You can always reach me, Navé, at jamesnavé.com. Navé is spelled N-A-V-E. And I'd like to remind you that we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you'd like to improve your writing chops, imaginativestorm.com is a great place to go. And we offer free writing workshops on Zoom. So if you're interested in connecting more with your writing and with a community of good writers and people that are very excited about telling their stories, imaginativestorm.com is a good place to do that. Today I have a new friend. I met Ritch Shydner this past Sunday at a brunch in Swannanoa, North Carolina. He lives in Asheville, and Ritch is a comedian. He's a screenwriter. He teaches in universities. He teaches screenwriting. He teaches how to create comedy on stage. He's been at this a long, long time. And when Ritch and I were talking, I realized I have never had a comedian on Twice 5 Miles Radio. I've had poets, I've had writers, I've had singer-songwriters, I've had financiers, Queenie Kim Chi, Colleen Queenie was on last week, but not a comedian. So Ritch, welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio.
Thanks, Navé.
I'm glad you agreed to join me. Now, when we were talking in Swannanoa, out there having a nice long brunch on Sunday, you were talking about comedy and how much you've been studying the history of comedy. And I, of course, had lots and lots of questions and still do now have questions for you. And one of the questions I asked you, and I'd like for you to start with answering this question again. I said, well, Ritch, what is the difference between being funny on stage and stand-up comedy? And you had a very insightful answer. So start with that and unpack some of your philosophy around comedy and the history of comedy and what you're up to right now in this very moment.
I did stand-up comedy for years. I started doing stand-up comedy in 1977. And I became friends with Phyllis Diller. She was the first star female stand-up comic in America. I became friends with her in the 80s, and she was also interested in the history of stand-up comedy. So we first had to sort of come up with a definition. And I've read one professor at one school had a 17-point definition of stand-up comedy. It was so complicated. It was like unbelievable, all the things that had to trigger for this professor to consider it stand-up. But for Phyllis and I, what we basically came up with was it's one person performing for an audience with the express purpose of making them laugh. That's basically it. It's just one person. It started out that way. When it was designated as stand-up comedy, the whole definition came into being around the 1940s. Before that, in vaudeville, and when it first started, they were called funny lecturers, monologists, called one-acts, comics, comedians. In the 1940s, stand-up comics had been performing in mob-owned clubs for a long time. But since the Prohibition started in 1920, in the mob world, in the underworld, somebody who they could trust, who wouldn't back down from a fight and would have your back at all times, they called that person a stand-up guy. Now, he's a stand-up guy. He's all right. Don't worry about that. He's a stand-up guy. So then they were also in the boxing business, and they called fighters who stood in the ring and really put on a great show, wouldn't back down, would trade blows with another opponent, a stand-up boxer. Like, he's a stand-up boxer. And they just applied it to the comics who were working in their clubs, who were one person taking on the entire audience. When you have another person up there with you, like a team, you can play off each other. You have each other. But the comic is there alone with the audience. And it's different than sketch work, and it's different than teamwork. And it's an American art form, original American art form. It was started in the Civil War, actually, by a comic who took the name Artemus Ward. His real name was Charles Farrar Brown. He was a famous writer, but he started doing stand-up comedy. He created the art form. It's really amazing. You can't even understand how different the time was. There was no radio, no television, no internet, all that sort of thing. The whole attitude towards comedy was different. It was not polite in public to laugh too much. because it was considered rude. They sort of went by Thomas Hobbes, who was an English philosopher, who said that when you laugh at someone or something, and to laugh too much is being rude. Artemus Ward and Abraham Lincoln, who was a huge comedy fan who loved telling stories and loved to laugh, they sort of really worked to change the whole ethos in America of the attitude towards humor. Because before that, you'd only have a little bit of comedy in any kind of play or any sort of public presentation, a lecture or whatever, just enough to let the medicine go down, because everything had to have a lesson, a moral lesson or an educational lesson. So just enough, they called it comic relief, just a little comic relief. And here's a guy that came up and said, I'm just going to do a show of nothing but jokes, nothing but laughter. Fun for fun's sake is what he said.
So Abraham Lincoln, we always think of him as some droll fellow. The photographs, of course, the poor guy, I don't think he ever had a good photograph taken. He always seems depressed. So when you say Abraham Lincoln played a role in stand-up comedy, I almost don't believe you, although I do believe.
Yeah, no, he was very funny, very, very the funniest president, the best sense of humor. There's so many famous things about him and jokes. And if you see the movie Lincoln, Spielberg's Lincoln, they show that side of him very clearly. He was debating when he was running for Senate in Illinois in 1858. He was running for Senate, U.S. Senator. So he's debating. Stephen Douglas was his opponent. So Stephen Douglas stands up and he does his bit. And at the end of it, he says, and my opponent, Abraham Lincoln, is two-faced. And he sits down and Lincoln stands up and tells the crowd, ladies and gentlemen, if I were two-faced, would I wear this one in public?
Oh, that is really good.
It's brilliant, funny. Maybe he wins the debate. Funny wins. Funny wins so much. It was truth of it. He knew what he looked like. His first photographs printed and put out in public were him without a beard. A teenager at the time wrote a letter and said, I think you look good with a beard. You know what? That's a good idea. Grow a beard.
So when you go on stage as a comedian, I know we talked about how much you have to practice in order to make it work. When one first starts out on stage, and I've been on stage a lot, and I've been on stage by myself a lot, performing solo shows. And I do often get laughs when I'm on stage because I'm exploring what might come next. I'm exploring what somebody says in the audience and then how to take it and respond back to it. And I have noticed that when I underplay it, I get more laughs than if I try for it. I'm not a stand-up comedian, although I've experienced that sense of soloness and the audience and the presenter in collaboration. It's one entity, right? It's almost one unit. Right. It has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with me and all of us together in one experience. Is that close?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I look at it as if you're in a band where the audience is part of the band. And you may be the leader of the band, but you better choose music to play that they can play and lead them so that they can follow you. And it's all, you're right, it's all integral. It's all integrated, the comic and the performance. There's no laughter. There's no performance for stand-up comedy. There's no show. The laughter is the whole point of it. And the audience knows that innately, that they're part of it. That's why they heckle. They want to see if you're there that night. I always looked at heckling as like, just to check to see if I'm there. Are you here? Or are you just on remote control? You're going to say the same things here tonight that you said last night exactly the same way? Is it just a script you're doing? Or can you get off and do a little jazz with it, a little improvisation? That's it. The audience is key to the whole performance. No laughter, there's no show.
And as we were talking, you were telling me that when you were at the top of your game doing stand-up comedy, you had a vast repertoire of information to draw from. Now, when I'm on stage getting a few laughs, I don't have that vast repertoire. I've not tried any of these jokes. I happen on something that I think might be interesting. I toss it out and it either lands as a humorous proposition or it is interesting for people, but they don't laugh. So for somebody that's a really high-level professional comedian, as you said, you're pulling from so much and you know that this is going to work ahead of time. Do you add any experimental stuff in there to see if there's new that will work as well?
Sure. Well, if you're trying new material all the time, and I love to do that. When you have a new joke, they know it, you know it. You know when you've hit upon something new. And a lot of times you get that by playing around with the audience and let them play with you. Let them spin you around and put you in a direction you weren't expecting. And there are things in your head that you kind of, well, I've kind of thought about this before. and I never really articulated it. Now it just comes out on stage and you just bang out the punchline perfectly. And there's somebody in the back, I would yell to comics in the back, write that one down, write it down. And so you don't want to forget them. You want to look, you write things on the page. You write something as a comic. You write something and you go, I think this is good. You don't know till you get on stage, and you have to form it on stage. You have to get the timing right. It has to be shaved. It has to be edited right. It has to be set up, getting the audience to the place where you present the punchline at exactly the moment when you present the punchline. It has to snap like a whip. If you have too much setup and they kind of figure out where you're going when you get there, it's a flat laugh, right? And if you don't have enough setup, they're confused when you deliver the punchline. There's maybe a delayed laugh. So you do that by performing. You do that by performing it all the time.
And you eventually find the right combination of timing if you do it enough. Is that correct?
Yeah. Exactly. You find the right formula so that you can do that again and again and again. Comics now, they tape everything they do, and they're always looking for something to put on TikTok or Instagram. But back in my day, I always thought the live performance was the most perishable thing on the planet. I mean, as soon as you said goodnight and as soon as the applause died down, that show was vapor. It was only in the memory of people who experienced it, and that's that. Stage time, that's the most valuable commodity in stand-up comedy, is stage time. You only get better by going on stage. You can't sit in your room and practice like a guitarist can. Right. I remember I've talked to musicians about that. I mean, they practice and practice. Oh, they discovered a lick, they bring it out and show the audience later. You can't do that. You can't practice without an audience. So you may come up with something sitting around with your friends, or something like I came up with something I like, Sunday at our brunch, and you think about it later. You go, maybe I can work that into something, but you can't actually get it right until you get on stage.
So you were talking about generating content that works for the audience. I know you mentioned you've done a lot of writing for TV, and you also teach screenwriting, which of course goes well beyond comedy. You said a few minutes ago, I write the joke and then I take it out on stage and try it out. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I like the idea of stand-up comedy. I like the idea of being on stage, and I'm very comfortable standing up and just running my mouth. I'm not trying to be funny. I just talk about stuff, and sometimes it's funny. So for someone like me, the idea of sitting down and trying to write jokes and then incorporate them into something that I'm doing as a spoken word performance poet standing on stage seems difficult for me. Whereas just going on stage, putting my head down, and then lifting up and saying, give me a topic to talk about, and off I go, that seems within my scope. How would you advise somebody like me, and I'm hoping other people out there listening may have similar questions, how could I hone a more comedic presentation? Would I have to write it? And if so, how do you write a joke? And then what do you do with it after you get it written? And I know you've written many, many jokes for TV. So you're in the writer's rooms. That's
Right.
been your job.
Right.
You know what I'm talking about. Help me understand how to take all of that content that's generated in the writer's rooms and on the page and bring it to life on the stage. What do I do? How do I do it?
Yeah. Even, and I've written for many comics, and even the comics I've written jokes for, they have to put it in their voice. I may be able to get their voice, and I've written for Leno and Jeff Foxworthy and Bill Maher and Roseanne. Roseanne's a woman. Obviously, I'm not a woman. I don't identify as a woman, but I could write jokes that her voice. Then if she liked the joke and would do it, she still has to put it in her voice, or maybe adjust it or something, not just the structure, the content of it. So you write, you come up with ideas, then you go on stage and do them. The only way to do it, the only way to do it is to be in front of the audience and do it. And it is totally different experience. The expectations, if they introduce you, they go, here's Navé, he's going to discuss his new book. And you go up there and you throw some funny things out. That's a bonus to them. You're there to discuss your book. Their expectations are you're going to talk about your book. If they say, here's Navé's, and you're in a comedy club, our next comedian, Navé, their expectations are you're going to be funny, bang, bang funny. Not like, a couple of them, maybe 10 minutes later, come up with something witty. You're going to be bang, bang funny. That's what they expected. They came there to laugh. They came there to get a fix. When you laugh hard, when you get in an audience, I used to say, like to run them. I like to run them. I like to get them laughing, get them on a roll, and they're laughing, and you realize you got to let up. They're like almost waving, and you've seen it. If you've seen like Chris Rock, or you've seen some killer comedian work a crowd, and their heads are going like this, right? They're going like this, and they're waving. Stop, man! You let me up for air. It's physically exhausting at a point. I mean, nothing thrills a comic more than when the audience members come up afterwards. They go, "My face hurts. You made me laugh so hard, my side hurts." They come in there for that fix. So the expectations when you get up there and those eyes look at you, Navé, different than when you're lecturing on something else. Than when they go, "This is a comedian," and they go, "Okay, we expect something."
So in many ways, the comedian's working in a very narrow category. I have to deliver belly laughs from start to finish. I have to be completely funny. People are expecting it. And if I don't do that, then I go flat. Whereas when I did a book reading recently, I have a book I wrote 100 poems. It's called 100 Days, Poems After Cancer. Questions follow each poem. And so as I was doing my reading, I was reading my poem, and then I say, "And now here's your question." And then I read the question, and I said, "Wow, that's really a good question." Everybody laughed. I read the next poem, and I said, "Here's your question." And I read the question, and I said, "These questions are actually better than my poems." And everybody laughed. So I was on a comedic role within the context of my reading and my talk. They weren't expecting it, so they enjoyed it. But for me to sustain that kind of humor from one beat to the next, that's a very decisive category.
Totally different expectations. I mean, I opened up for so many rock groups when I first started. That was most of my stage time in Washington, D.C. I'd walk out there, he doesn't have a guitar. We didn't even expect the comedian to be here. So you could surprise them that way. And you're in a comedy club, you're not surprising anybody. They know. So when you're doing what you're doing, you're lecturing about your book, that's a bonus for them. Their expectations are, we're going to discuss your poetry and insights of life, fun with language that poetry is. You're going to give them some laughs. They love that. That's great. But their expectations are lower. They're in terms of comedy, they're lower. Right. I mean, there is bad poetry, like there's bad comedy. When I first started, it was new. The comedy was just breaking out, and so people weren't used to seeing live comedy. This is like 1979, really when it started breaking out. 80 when the clubs started popping around America. So you didn't have that laughs per minute demand. They were like, well, if you could be interesting up there, that's fine. You can the laughs. We want laughs, but at least be interesting. Generally speaking, it's not about smiles. It's not that you're not going up there to be witty. You know the difference between witty and funny? About 10 million a year. You're not going to make money in comedy being witty, or humorous. You got to be funny. It's about being funny. They want that laugh. That's where the endorphins are. That's where the magic is. And it's, you see comics now in rock star situations. I mean, stadiums, huge amounts, because it's that communal thing. When you're all laughing at the same thing in that moment, doesn't matter what color you are, doesn't matter what race, religion, any of that kind of stuff doesn't matter. You're all together on that moment. It is so tribal. It is so primal. You see old people go to rock concerts and all, but I remember seeing Jethro Tull on their Aqualung tour back in 1971, right? But at one point, I remember this as a kid, they're flashing the lights on, everybody's on their feet, pumping their arms to the beat of Locomotive Breath. And I'm like looking around going, there's 14,000 of us in here, all pumping our arms in the same beat. I go, wow, it was such a powerful feeling. Comics can do that for audiences now, and they do it. There's so many comics who can draw so many people. And I think that this generation today, they get as much out of that. Probably, I don't see it in the music for them like that. And maybe they do, but I mean, comedy's risen to that level.
I've often thought when you have a poetry reading, people don't even expect to smile, much less laugh. they're
Yeah, yeah.
dour. They're like so serious, and if you get a laugh out of them, it shocks them. So
Well,
you
well,
can be a successful stand-up comedian at a poetry reading. All you have to do is just one lousy joke that makes somebody's eyes twinkle in the back, and you're over the top. Good.
Uh,
Um,
I never thought of what would be the expectations in poetry. Like, going, well, I at least want to get like an aha moment. Be great.
and then, of course, a lot of people that go to poetry readings, their expectation is, I hope I don't fall asleep.
Yeah,
And you have such a completely different vibe.
yeah.
Now, I also have seen some terrific people on stage who are stand-up poets, and they're so close to comedy.
Oh,
It overlaps
yeah,
dramatically, and the really
yeah.
seasoned stage performers, they can work an audience. So I want to ask you, do you have any jokes that you have written? I'm not asking you to be a stand-up comic on this show, jokes that you know work, and could you give us a little bit of a deconstruction of how a joke works, what's required to make one, what it looks like?
I'm putting this in a book I'm writing, and I'm putting it in for a character. And the book takes place in 1981, and this joke came around that time for me. So, and I'll tell you the genesis of it. I'm going on a date with a woman, an actress. She was in acting class with me out in California. We're going on a date. So I go to pick her up. She says, I'm not ready yet. Why don't you just sit in the living room and wait? So come sit in the living room. And this is, again, 1981. So she's got her album collection there, an album. So I start going through her albums. And it's all Broadway show tune albums, Barry Manilow, a lot of soft music. Now, this is just for me. I got very uncomfortable. I go, we're not going to work out. Our musical tastes are so out of line with each other that, to me, the date was over. It was over. By the time she walked out ready for the date, I was like, this is not going to work. I just knew it. Now I got to figure out a joke out of that, because I got the feeling, I've got the discomfort, which is where most comedy comes from, right? It's a complaint about something. It's a feeling of discomfort that you short circuit that feeling with a joke.
Your discomfort was because you realized the music didn't square with your taste.
There wasn't one album I could find. If there was like a James Taylor album, I could, okay, I can go with James Taylor once a month. There was nothing in there. I can't even tell you, all of them. It was mostly Broadway show tunes and really like soft music and almost like our parents' music collection or something. I don't know what to say. But so I had this thought. I'm talking to some people at the Improv in West Hollywood. I can remember this now, and I'm describing this date. And my mind blurts out. I go, I might as well have found body parts in the refrigerator. It was over, right? It was over. And they laughed. And so I went, there it is. There's the line. Now I have to take it on stage. And I had to form the joke. And then I did the joke, and it got laughs. And it was good, right? It was good. And then, of course, like everything else, when you get new jokes, older jokes get pushed out of your act. You only have so much time on stage. Back then, when I first started, it was unlimited because they hadn't changed the drunk driving laws in the comedy club. So they would like you to be on stage as long as you can to sell as much liquor as possible. But then they started having to, around 84, 85, they had to change. But so you only have so much time on stage. And so what you're interested in talking about changes as you change as a person and a performer. But that joke is, I know it'll work. I know it'll work because I've worked it. I've done it. And especially in the context of this book and that character in that time.
So on stage, how would you play that joke out? How would you tell it?
Most of my act back then, again, was I was always in a relationship. I never could do the loser datings thing. It didn't work for me. For comics, you have to understand how the audience sees you. That's the most important thing, really, besides likability and relatability. But when the comic understands how the audience sees them, and then the comic can reflect that back to the audience comedically, that's when you see like Rodney Dangerfield. Rodney Dangerfield presented like a guy who was not really together on stage. So he presented that lovable loser back to the audience, and they loved him for it. They bought it. You know who Sarah Silverman is?
Yes.
Sarah Silverman, the comedian. She's a comedian. I watched her years ago. I went, she understood. She's a big fan of Steve Martin, who did an unbelievable character. Nobody hit the zeitgeist at that time of the late 70s. The me decade, the navel gazing, the narcissism of that whole time, like Steve Martin. He just turned it on its head and did a great character and became a superstar. She was a fan of his when she was a young girl. And the first time I saw her, I went, oh, yeah, she's doing the character. she's got a character. She's innately knew or understood that the audience saw her as a Jewish American princess type. She was this very attractive young Jewish woman. And so she played that like that. She played that entitled, clueless sort of character and did it brilliantly with deadpan and irony.
In the character development arena,
Right.
I used to play a character called Nadine the drag queen. And it was during the times when I was teaching artist way classes. And in the artist way work, artist way written by Julia Cameron, there's this idea of the secret self and the idea that you have many different characters inside of you. Like I have Navé, James Navé, as in Bond, James Bond. And then I have Nadine, the drag queen. And then I have other characters as well. And you can develop 15 or 20 different archetypes inside your imagination. And so when I played Nadine, the drag queen, I would have the people dress me up in drag. Now, I am so far from a drag queen. I don't do that. That's not my shtick. And yet I ended up in that character. So what I've discovered was when people would ask me questions and I answered as Nadine, the answers were hilarious and they were consistently funny. And I was not really trying to be funny. I was just responding as Nadine. And for some reason, it was funny. So there's a difference, it strikes me, between the character development, which was easier for me to do than just me standing on stage trying to be a comedian. So are you hiding behind a character, or is the character just part of you that informs your joke?
I know you definitely can. Most stand-up comics who do a character, whether it was the late Judy Tenuta or Emo Phillips or any of those characters, right? It's something in them, like you do, like you found. It's something part of their personality. They blow up bigger on stage. We all tend to blow up bigger on stage. You know, what I do up there is me. It's just a little bit hyper version of, because you get on stage, the adrenaline, everything else, but you hype that up to present comedically. Were you dressed in drag when you performed as Nadine?
Well, sometimes I would just put a scarf on. I didn't really have to fully dress. Occasionally, the people in the class would bring outfit and they would dress me up and I would present myself. I let them create Nadine using me as their subject. But all I needed often was just a scarf and a slight change in the way I moved.
It's interesting, because so traditionally, I mean, you remember in comedy for years, in film, on stand-up, whatever, that a man dressed as a woman was always very funny. A woman dressed as a man tended to be threatening until, I think, again, the times changed. I remember when Lily Tomlin did Tommy Velour was a character she did. She did a bunch of appearances on Letterman dressed as a man, and it was very, very funny. But before that, it would be more seen as a threatening thing. And a man dressed as a woman was very comedic, right? Only comedy, really, only comedy. Of course, now today it's very different. The times have changed. A man dressed as a woman would not be necessarily just viewed in a comedic sense. So times change. When times change, comedy changes. Comedy is a reflective art form. Nobody's changing anybody's opinion with comedy. We're just reflecting what it is. And the culture at the time changes and comedy changes.
So taking this idea of the date, discovering you do not have things in common, the way you discovered that, you found it because you looked at the record collection. Another person might walk in and find the whole ambience of the room completely wrong. This is a very, very bohemian character with all of this weird stuff hanging around. And my apartment is very well organized and everything is just so. So you have that. And then you get to the punchline. It's like opening the refrigerator and finding dead bodies. It's like opening a refrigerator and finding it was full of spinach, or finding it was full of whatever it is that you find offensive.
You're picking right. You're picking the punchline here. It's interesting. You're doing this. I love this whole exercise. The stand-ups that I know, and I know stand-up comics who make money and never say a funny thing off stage. They're not naturally funny people, right? But they've learned to do it on stage. But the people who I know who are really, truly funny, stand-up funny, they think funny first. They think funny first. I've thought funny first my entire life. Now, in terms of propriety, I learned how to mute it sometimes, not say what I'm thinking sometimes. especially when I was in class or whatever in school. You learn that the hard way.
Mm-hmm.
But my thoughts were always funny first. And so I trust it. I've learned to trust it. You learn that on stage too. Robin Williams was brilliant, and he trusted himself on stage. And that's why he was so great at improvisation. You have to learn to trust yourself. A friend of mine, Rick Overton, is great at improvisation. He used to work with Robin on stage all together. He trusts himself innately. So I'll say the first thing comes out of my mind. And again, at that table with my friends, I was loose, and you just trust it. Boom, comes out. Body parts. Boom. That's the thing that came out. And I caught a laugh, and I trust the laugh. You trust the laugh.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, well, you could switch out body parts to all kinds of other things. And if you found something that was so offensive when you open your refrigerator, spinach being something that maybe I found offensive, you might be able to make the joke work, because if I'm delivering the joke on stage and I find spinach as offensive as body parts, I'm having the same emotional response to spinach that somebody else would have to body parts. The audience would be reading my emotional offensiveness, even though it's not body parts. Or is it something that has to be more collectively offensive, like body parts, and I'm not as attached to it emotionally? Maybe I'm not offended by body parts. Maybe spinach undoes me more than body parts, but I'm still going to lay out body parts because I know it's more a collective offense.
Right. You look at what offends the audience changes with the audience. And I can tell you a quick story, because you just talked about spinach. And I was trying to think what group would be offended by spinach. And I couldn't really come up with a group that would absolutely be offended by spinach. Way back in the day, I did a corporate gig. You get paid a lot of money, normally more than you normally get, but you also have to cater to a specific audience. And this was Budweiser distributors of the Southeast. So it was in Richmond, Virginia, right? And they were all these people who had Budweiser distributorship. They were selling Budweiser to the bars. These were very successful people. And everything you saw everywhere around, Budweiser, huge inflatable cans, buckets of cold Budweiser everywhere. And so the promoter, he was a Richmond guy, said, look, I got this young comic. I want to give him a couple minutes in front of you. The young comic's going to go up to 5 minutes as your opening act. I said, fine. The young comic is inexperienced in his act. I'm sure he didn't have a lot to choose from at that point. He had a joke about Miller Lite commercials at the time. Miller Lite commercials at the time were very funny and popular. He starts going, you ever see that Miller Lite commercial? And I'm telling you, instantaneously, the entire audience starts booing. I mean, he doesn't even get out the rest of the joke. He did not stop and think, I'm at a Budweiser convention. Miller Lite is their opponent. That's their competitor. It's their, they didn't want to hear whether else he had to say about the Miller Lite commercial. He never recovered in his 5 minutes. They turned off to him and he bombed in 5 minutes. I walk out, and a friend of mine, Mike McDonald, had this joke about Budweiser. The thing about Bud that makes it so popular is no matter how drunk you get, you can order a Bud. Somebody else may come up, you can't say it, but you come up there and go, Bud, right? And they went crazy, right off the bat. The first joke I did, which I'd already talked to my friend, let me do that joke. He's like, yeah, do it, right? So he didn't play the crowd, and the crowd will change what is offensive or not offensive all the time. Every crowd, when people talk about politically correct, every group has a system of values and ethos that they subscribe to, right? It's a group think. Every group has a political correctness to it. If you go up and perform at the NRA convention and you start making fun of men and guns, I guarantee you they're going to get politically correct on you real fast. Okay, as was exhibited in the Budweiser convention about talking about Miller Lite. Every group has that. So you have to know the audience, and that'll change what you find offensive. I couldn't think of anything about spinach that was offensive. I was trying while you were talking. I was trying to think of something, Navé, but I couldn't find a group that would find it offensive. Maybe the broccoli growers. If you had broccoli growers, I don't talk about spinach. They're our competitors. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think that the only way that you can make that joke work using spinach would be to do for kindergartners who hate spinach, because kids always hate spinach. all right, kids. I have something for you. I know you're only 3 years old, but you're not going to be dating for another 12 years. But let me give you a little lesson now.
They don't understand the dating concept, but they sure know that spinach is not a good.
We don't like spinach. No,
There wasn't a ice cream. There wasn't a cookie in sight, just nothing
Nothing,
but
just
spinach.
spinach.
Oh,
I hate it. I could just
oh,
okay, but the 4-year-olds aren't going to give you the big bucks like the Budweiser executives. We know that.
no,
Uh,
no.
Changing just a little bit, you teach screenwriting to young people now. You've had a lot of
Yes.
experience with this. You mentioned political correctness and how usage is changing. What do you do in your screenwriting classes to invite these younger people into the concepts of screenwriting? And screenwriting is a formula. You have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You have to have conflict. You need a story that's compelling, something that everybody understands, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it has to be highly structured, 120 pages. Now, with the Netflix shows, it's different because you have a long series. Breaking Bad lasted a long time. And I know that there are writers' rooms. So it's not just one person generating these scripts. So how do you approach the students and how do you teach them and get them engaged so they think they can join in this romp through the world of screenwriting?
Well, I teach at University of North Carolina School of the Arts in Winston-Salem. Right now, I'm an adjunct professor. So the first semester was all about screenwriting. We worked on a screenplay, and they do that themselves as a project. They were working on a screenplay outline. It's something they could actually finish themselves. You don't have enough time to do the whole thing, but it was screenwriting. Now, in this semester, we're doing television. So again, whether it's limited series that you talk about on the streaming services like Netflix or Apple or whatever, or network television shows as sitcoms or drama series, it's a different situation. And that's when you come in with a writer's room, which I had experience. I mean, sitcoms are notorious for writer's rooms. I mean, that's most of it's generated there. They're not so much in drama series, but in sitcoms, it's all about funny. It's a collaborative effort. It takes that. And so they learn that doing that together. It's really fun to watch. They're just tremendous with each other. I have such respect and love for these students. They don't need my help in terms of political correctness. They know where the line is. They know where the line is. They're culturally aware so much better. It's their time. I can observe from an older person's perspective. What happens with people in my generation is we forget where the line is. We don't know where it is. It's moved past us. We're like, I tell some of my friends sometimes, I go, don't be outraged. Just understand it. That it's time for you to step out of the parade and wave the flag. That's all. Just watch it go by. That's all you are. That's at that point. You don't understand what's going on because it's not our time. It's interesting process. It's about learning and relearning, and that's what growth is. And I have a feeling you're probably one of those people. I try to be. I want to learn. I want to learn what's going on. We talked about the transgender situation, and the students were telling me the things that I didn't understand, and it's great to learn. It's great to understand. They don't need my help at all, man. They know exactly what's going on. I mean, some of the things they're writing is so edgy. And you're teaching the classic structure, but they may want to play with it. They may want to play with it. As Quentin Tarantino might play with it, but he learned, I suspect, classic structure before he started playing with the format and the structure. Anybody like that, or any sort of movie that would be different. Picasso learned how to do classic painting before he went off to do what he wanted to really do. He learned the basics, and then do what you want to do artistically. You know what you're doing then.
What are some of the things or insights these younger people have given you around the way they view the world that opened your eyes, helped you understand something more than what you had before you encountered them?
Every generation sort of loses touch culturally. They lose a touch with what's going on. I mean, my grandparents, they were born in 1900. They couldn't understand the civil rights movement of the 50s. Their attitude was like, what, you mean all black people aren't happy? What do you mean? They seem happy in the movies. I mean, right? They couldn't understand it. Then my parents' generation couldn't understand the protests against the war. Or there's things they kind of lose touch with. And my generation couldn't understand the change of sexual, not just orientation, but identification, because we grew up in such a binary world, my generation did. But there might be an upside to this. People are complaining that my generation of baby boomers aren't getting out of the way. They're not retiring. They're not getting out of the way. And this may be an upside. You tell them that before they come to work Monday, they have to have understanding of the different pronouns. They're like, okay, I'm done. I'm retired. Send my check to the beach. I'm done. And Lenny Bruce, the great Lenny Bruce comedian, who was a cultural bomb thrower of all time, when Christine Jorgensen who was the first American to have sexual reassignment surgery back in the 50s. He didn't joke about Christine Jorgensen. Lenny Bruce said, look, I don't understand it, but for a person to go through sexual reassignment surgery, this is serious stuff. I don't understand, so I'm not going to joke about it. What he did was he made fun of the hacks who made fun of her. That's what he did. These students said there are people who biologically were given the wrong equipment. They want to correct that, and they can correct that now with hormones and surgery. That's a very tiny percentage. What they're talking about in terms of binary and non-binary, I'm going to tell you what this is. That we're going to redefine the world for us. As David Bowie said, these children that you spit on are quite aware of what they're going through as they try to change the world, right? When I say I don't identify as a male or a female, they're just saying I'm not taking those roles that society assigns them. I was like, oh, that was a light went on for me. I go, oh, that's what it is. They're going like, I'm biologically male, but I'm not going to identify as a male because I don't want all that you tell me I have to be when I say I'm a male, that I have to like sports or I have to hunt or I have to do this or whatever it is, or I have to be totally the provider and the protector and the family, the head of the family. I'm not going to take those roles. And it's like, oh, okay, I get it. It's not just about the biological equipment, so to speak. It's really about what society is telling you, and you're going, well, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you we're redefining this for you. We're redefining it for their own generation. It's their generation. It's their time. It's their world now. It's their world.
Well, I come across a lot of people who have resistance to the pronoun, and the pronoun changes, and they don't know quite how to deal with all of the action that's going on in the younger circles. And I'm with you. I'm not that fussed by all of that.
Doesn't affect me.
I sometimes get fussed about one pronoun usage. And sometimes when I'm in a restaurant and the server approaches the table and says, are we ready to order? Somehow I always found that use of a pronoun very clumsy. I'm going, are we ready? I'm thinking, no, you're taking the order. We're ready to order, but why are you including yourself in our ordering? Are we ready to order? And I love the idea of the inclusiveness of it.
I get what you're saying, but I'm thinking they've always used that. I remember sitting there by myself and they come up, are we ready to order? And you go, you can tell a multi-personality just by looking at me. They use the collective we all my life. I never really thought about that until you just said that.
Yeah, well, I've seen it all my life too. I used to wait tables in the 70s and earned pretty good money waiting tables. And I used it. Are we ready to order? And I noticed that when I was using it, it didn't feel right because I understood that I'm not them. And so I finally revised that. Are you ready to order? And I love the pronoun you. I love that pronoun you. Are you ready to order? Thank you.
It's a great story. You know The Who, Pete Townsend, right?
Yeah,
The Who.
Yeah, sure.
John Entwistle, the bass player, one time, this is years ago, says to Pete Townsend, I don't understand this rap music. I don't understand this rap music at all. And Pete Townsend says, we don't have to understand it. We just have to get out of the way. It's their time.
And then also what I've discovered about pronoun usage. When someone asks me to change pronouns, so I want to be referred to as they, not as he or she, it takes about 3 months. So if you want me to refer to you by another name, and I've known you for a long time as Ritch, 3 months from now, I might know you as Baxter or William or Sammy, and I will have completely forgotten your name. But in that 3-month arc, I have to work at it to get around to having you be a new person. And the same thing with someone that asks for a pronoun change. I'm not able to do that immediately if I've been so focused on the pronoun she or he this, she that. 3 months from now, I'm okay with they, but it takes that much shifting.
What happens when you get older is you get ossified, right? You get set in your patterns, your ways, can't teach an old dog new tricks. You get less flexible. And so they're like, I don't want to learn that. Why do I? It's an effort. You're willing to make the effort. I'm willing to make the effort.
Yeah.
I mean, I see people when they identify, they go, even in the emails coming out from the school to me, someone will go, he, him, they, them, whatever it is they put in parentheses after their name down to them. I don't bother to do it. Doesn't mean they could call me whatever they want. My dad used to say, call me anything but late for dinner. I don't care. It's okay with me. It doesn't bother me, but I respect them. And if somebody wants me to change how I do it at school, I'll go, look, guys, I'm from New Jersey. And guys was like dude today. Women call a guy dude. Women call another woman dude. Dude is dude, right? When I grew up, it was guys. Guys was men or women. And then I try to come correct, and I try to get the pronouns that, and if they want, and specifically, if somebody wants something different, I just try to adjust.
So as we are arriving at the time that we need to close, I just wanted to sum up by saying you and I have been going back and forth in this incredible conversation. We have been mucking around in language and exploring, trying to figure out how we fit in, what it means to us. And it's clumsy, it's exploratory, it's not quite precise and directed. And when you're developing comedy, my sense after having this hour with you, this is the stuff of comedy. From all of this fumbling around, somewhere along the way, a joke will emerge like an egg hatching in a nest.
I love, that's the best comedy is about language and behavior to me, the things you can't, I don't like making fun of things that you can't change as a person or whatever. Okay. I don't like that. But that's the best. And in fact, George Carlin, he loved language. Lenny Bruce was all about language. The first stand-up comic, Artemis Ward, had a joke. Why did they say the house burned up? Because it burned down, really. I mean, that was a joke he did back in 1860s. And the audience laughed because he's playing with the language. He's pointing out the inconsistencies in language that we have. And that's where comedy lies. Comedy lies in the inconsistencies and the contradictions. And we were just playing with that just now. That's what we were doing. That's the formation of comedy.
Well, Ritch, I really appreciate you.
I love when I was talking, you started thinking, I go, that's not good comedy. I got him thinking. Don't make them do math in your jokes. Don't do that. They got to do math. They're not going to laugh. They're all thinking about the math, trying to figure it out in their head. I had you thinking that's not good comedy.
You don't want to stand on a stage and open your comedy routine by saying 2 + 2 = what?
Yeah, they're like, oh man, make us work.
Anyway, Ritch, thank you for taking this time to be with me on Twice 5 Miles Radio. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed it, Navé. Thank you, brother.
And there you go, my friends. Some good information about comedy from comedian Ritch Shydner. Now that Ritch has taught us a little bit more about what it means to be a stand-up comedian, maybe you'll like to try it. I think he maybe talked me out of it. I believe I'm going to stick with spoken word poetry and stand-up storytelling, which does not require constant laughs. So speaking of stand-up storytelling, I'm going to be hosting the Leaf Story Slam at the Leaf Global Arts Retreat in May in Asheville. I've been hosting the Leaf Poetry Slam for many years, and now we're focusing on the Story Slam as well. We'll still keep the Leaf Poetry Slam in the fall, but now our attention is on the Story Slam, and the theme is world changers. Now, what does that mean? I've rolled that around in my head quite a bit, and on this show I've talked about our ability to change the world, and I think I've said before, and I'll say it again, we cannot change the world in the sense of totality. We can change and participate in activities that change things in the world. We can make that one ripple in the lake. So with that in mind, I feel good about the topic, world changers. And here's the brief for the Story Slam, in case you'd like to participate on May the 10th between 7 and 9 p.m. in the barn. We'd love to have you. So here's the brief. Think of a time when something artistic, a piece of art, influenced you to make a change in the world, small or large. And even if you're not able to attend the Story Slam at Leaf, this is still a brief worth thinking about. And the reason why, when I first came up with it, I was thinking of art in a limited way, like a painting on the wall or a photograph. And recently, a friend of mine who was considering developing something for the Story Slam said, well, how do you define art? And it dawned on me, well, that you can define your experience with art in almost any way you want. For example, if you spotted a really dynamic billboard that motivated you to do something, that changed your life and motivated you to make some kind of changes, like a billboard for a concert that you then attended. And then you went to the concert, and the concert inspired you. Certainly the concert would be a piece of art. And off you went from that concert to do something that you had never thought of before. Or say, for example, if you went to a fantastic poetry slam and you saw poets on the stage performing, and when you left the poetry slam, you decided you were going to pick something up yourself, make something worthy of someone else hearing, and performed it on the stage. I remember in 1991, when I went to the National Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee, I heard the storytellers on the stage performing stories, and I was just completely flabbergasted. I had no idea how they did it. I came away from that event, went back in 1992, and I witnessed it again. It took me an entire year to process what I had seen. And when I came back the second time, I thought, what if one took poetry, or what if I took poetry and told poetry as stories, or told poems as stories? And so the art that I saw at the Storytelling Festival, and it wasn't just one piece of art, but it was many, many experiences during those 2 weekends, first weekend of October, and they still hold the Storytelling Festival the first weekend of October. When I came back from that event, I thought, gosh, I could do this too. And that's when I started memorizing poems and telling them as stories. And that started an entire career for me. So art on stage at the National Storytelling Festival, hearing poets recite The Cremation of Sam McGee, maybe The Highwayman, and some other cowboy poems on stage in the early 90s influenced me to do what I'm doing today. I would not be able to have this moment here with you at Grimelli Café, attached to Earth Fair in Asheville, finishing up this show, if I hadn't gone to that storytelling festival. Did what I do after the storytelling festival change the world? No. Did it change people in the world? Yes. Did I inspire people to pick up their talent and start telling stories? Some people have told me I did because of what I did. So that's what we're looking for at the Leaf Global Arts Storytelling Slam. And just in case you're wondering what slam means you will be judged by members of the audience, 0 to 10 like a diving match, just like in a poetry slam. So there will be a little bit of friendly competition on the stage at the Leaf Global Arts Story Slam, which is fine. We encourage that. And can art change the world? Yes, it can. And it does it by inspiration. You inspire me, I inspire you. You go out and you do something because of that inspiration, and change happens. So that's what we're looking for. That's what we mean by changing the world with whatever art form you have. Or for that matter, everything you do changes the world. 1 second, move to the right, move to the left, the world is altered because of the actions you take. Put 8 billion people together, taking actions 24 hours a day. Does that alter the world? It might not alter the flow of the Mississippi or the flow of the Amazon River, at least in that moment. But it does alter how we exist in the world, and our existence in the world does influence all of the things around us. We know that already. So you have a choice. You can think about the things you do. And when you make those moves throughout your life, artistic or otherwise, just know that you're participating in something that we're all participating in. And there's great value in that. So be thoughtful, be aware, and enjoy the fact that you have the opportunity to ripple out no matter what you do throughout your day. Every second belongs to you and is shared with the rest of us. And on that note, I'll say thank you for listening to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVMLP and streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville, heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. WalterParks.com for more on Walter's music. Devine Dial, thank you for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville. We appreciate it. Robin Collier, the same to you in Taos, New Mexico, KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio. If you'd like to reach out to me, Navé at jamesnavé.com. If you do have a story about how art influenced you and you're not able to make it to the Leaf Global Arts Story Slam, you can email me your story. I'd love to hear it. I would really be interested in that. And I'd like to remind you that we're also sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you would like to improve your writing chops and get involved with a great community of writers, the door's always open, and we would certainly love to have you. It'd be great fun to have you join us in any way you like. And as I said a moment ago, I'm in a little coffee shop in Asheville, and I'm glad to be in coffee shops, and I like to sometimes do my shows editing and airing and making these final comments in coffee shops. So you always have a little background noise. Background noise is changing the world. So once again, thanks ever so much for joining me for this our time together, and I do hope you can make it back sometime soon. And until then, I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.